an incident bridge, late in the day. The logs are quiet, the main dashboards are green again, and the worst of the containment work is behind you. Someone senior leans in and asks the question that always comes sooner or later. So, when do we get back to normal? You can feel the pull of that promise in the room. At the same time, you know that whatever comes next will not look like last Tuesday afternoon. The environment has changed, the people have changed, and the trust you place in your systems and partners has changed. The idea of normal is already gone.
Welcome to this Wednesday headline feature from Bare Metal Cyber Magazine, developed by Bare Metal Cyber. In this narration, we explore why return to normal is such a powerful story and why it so often leads leaders into bad recovery decisions. Real-world recovery is not about rewinding to a clean snapshot. It is about choosing which new steady state you are willing to live in after the damage is done. If you lead security, technology, or the business, your job is not to promise the old world back. Your job is to define what a safer, more honest new world looks like and guide people into it.
The phrase normal operations sounds objective and precise when it shows up on a status slide. In practice, it is a loose bundle of assumptions. Before an incident, people imagine normal as stable cloud regions, a small set of trusted SaaS tools, and a reasonably clean inventory of identities and systems. The truth underneath is messier. There are forgotten firewall exceptions, shadow integrations a team set up 6 months ago, temporary vendor access that quietly became permanent, and manual workarounds that never made it into documentation. The baseline you think you have is not the one you are actually running.
When a serious incident lands, it does not knock you off a fixed baseline. It exposes the fact that the baseline was already moving. Yet the language of back to normal is compelling. It carries a promise of closure. Boards want to hear it so they can move on. Regulators hint at it when they talk about restoring normal operations. Internal stakeholders cling to it because they are tired and afraid and need something solid to hold on to. If you design recovery around that promise, you start baking old weaknesses into your future state.
That shows up in the decisions you make under pressure. If the goal is back to normal, then every control you add starts to feel temporary. Extra approvals on administrative actions are treated as friction that must be rolled back. Tighter third-party rules are seen as a phase to be pushed through, not a new standard. Reduced feature sets are described as a short-term inconvenience, even when those features open up high-risk paths. You can hear it in the language. We'll lock this down for now, then loosen it once everything is normal again. Without meaning to, you are promising to reopen doorways you just watched an attacker use. Over time, the myth of normal makes its way into your documents as well. Disaster recovery, DR plans, talk about restoring normal operations as if that were a single, well-defined target. Service-level objectives assume a binary world in which you are either meeting them or not yet back. Post-incident reviews talk about returning to business as usual as a clean endpoint. When everything is framed around that simple normal, you are stuck with only 2 stories after an incident. You made it back or you failed. Real resilience requires more stories than that. When you drop the rewind fantasy, recovery reveals itself for what it really is, a large-scale reconfiguration of how your organization works. After a material incident, you change identity patterns, not just passwords. You reconsider which identity providers you trust and how they are connected. You alter remote access flows and virtual private networks. You disable integrations that once felt harmless. You inject new monitoring points and approval steps. Even if the tool names stay the same, the way those tools are scoped and wired into your environment changes. Seen through that lens, recovery is not the act of restoring a frozen picture. It is the act of building a new version of your environment under intense pressure. The systems have scars. Some users have lost confidence.
Some vendors have earned extra scrutiny. Your attack surface is different, and your tolerance for certain patterns should be different as well. When you stop promising a return to the old baseline, you can start asking better questions. Instead of, when will everything be back? The more honest question is, what should our new trust boundaries look like, and which dependencies do we still want to live with? This is where your diagrams and inventories matter. Service maps, dependency graphs, and data flow diagrams cannot stay as static artifacts that only architects care about. In recovery as reconfiguration, they become blueprints. Teams can mark which edges are being cut, which are being tightened, and which must be rebuilt in safer patterns. They can define a small set of acceptable configurations you are willing to inhabit after a crisis. Recovery becomes a choice between these configurations, not a race to rebuild an imagined old one. That is a very different kind of leadership decision.
Every organization already runs in degraded modes from time to time. A region hiccups, and a team moves part of the workload by hand. A key integration breaks, and someone in operations runs a script twice a day instead of relying on automation. A service is quietly marked "Do Not Touch" in chat, and people change their workflows while the team digs into the problem. These are unscripted degradations. They are messy, hard to explain to outsiders, and often invisible in official plans. When a serious incident hits, the same improvisation appears, just with higher stakes and more people watching.
The difference between resilient and brittle organizations is not whether they degrade, it is whether they do it on purpose. Planned degraded modes start with explicit sacrifice decisions. You might decide that certain non-core features are the first to go offline because they traverse many trust boundaries or involve higher-risk data. You might choose to keep core transactional systems alive in a hardened state while moving certain customer segments to slower, manual processes. You may pause new account creation or freeze sensitive configuration changes until you have better visibility. None of these moves are pleasant, but they are far easier to execute if they have been discussed in calm time. When you predefine degraded modes, you force the hard conversations out of the heat of an incident. Business leaders get input into which services matter most to customers and revenue. Security teams can explain why some paths are riskier than others. Operations can estimate which manual workarounds are practical for days and which will fall apart in hours. Together, you can decide who bears the pain first when the environment is constrained. That process turns an unspoken power struggle into a documented set of trade-offs that you can revisit and refine. Governance is where this either works or collapses. In the middle of an incident, business leaders will often push to restore the loud, visible features first, even when those features carried much of the risk. Security and operations may want to keep everything locked down for as long as possible. If you have no prior agreement, the incident bridge turns into a negotiation driven by whoever has the most authority or the loudest voice. With pre-agreed degraded modes, the argument shifts. You are no longer inventing the compromise live. You are choosing from options you have already named and understood.
Traditional disaster recovery playbooks come from a simpler era. They were built for data center failures, storage array crashes, or single-site disasters. The story was linear: declare an event, fail over to a secondary, validate, and then declare success. Today's incidents rarely follow that script. You might be dealing with identity compromise, partial data corruption, compromised suppliers, and active regulatory attention all at once. In that world, a single linear playbook is not enough.
A more realistic model is a resilience portfolio, a small set of clearly defined operating states your organization can inhabit during and after an incident. Each state has a name, a set of constraints, and agreed-upon expectations. You might have a state where your core systems run, but all external integrations are severed. Another where customer-facing features are sharply limited while investigations continue. Another where operations continue under specific regulators' oversight with extra reporting and monitoring obligations. Recovery becomes the process of moving between these states rather than marching toward a vague and singular normal. These named states help you think about triggers and authority. Leaving a more isolated state might require independent validation from internal assurance or an external partner. You may require evidence that compromised identities have been rotated, that suppliers have implemented agreed-upon changes, and that new telemetry is live and being reviewed. Moving into a more constrained state might be linked to specific detection patterns or thresholds. Instead of arguing in abstract terms about safety and readiness, you are making decisions about concrete entry and exit criteria that people can see and test. Thinking in terms of a portfolio also lets you attach funding and accountability to resilience, not just to uptime. Maintaining these states means keeping documentation current, practicing transitions during exercises, and making sure teams understand what each state implies for their daily work. Those tasks can be budgeted, owned, and measured. Recovery stops being a one-off heroic effort and starts looking like a capability you develop over time. Leaders can ask not just, how fast did we get services back, but how reliably can we move into a safer state under stress, and how long can we stay there without breaking?
All of this lands back on leadership behavior. As a Chief Information Security Officer or a technology leader, you carry the responsibility for how the story is told. Standing up in front of your organization and saying, "We are back to normal," feels good in the moment, but sets the wrong expectation. A more honest and useful sentence sounds like this: "We are now operating in a defined recovery state, and here is what has changed for good." That frame makes space for permanent improvements. It tells people that some of the new friction is intentional and here to stay.
Communicating that normal has changed is delicate. You have to balance transparency about the incident and its consequences with the need to maintain confidence. Boards need to see not just that systems are up, but that you have moved to a safer posture and are prepared to stay there. Regulators will want to hear how your controls and monitoring have improved, not just that you restored service. Employees and customers need clear guidance on what to expect day to day. When you use the language of operating states and deliberate degradations, you give all of these audiences a better vocabulary for understanding what recovery really means.
Inside your own team, you can adjust how success is measured. If recovery metrics focus solely on time to restore, you will get behavior that optimizes for speed, sometimes at the cost of long-term stability and trust. If you add measures around the readiness and quality of your operating states, the reliability of transitions, and the permanence of key improvements, you change the incentives. Teams are rewarded not just for getting things up quickly, but for getting them up into a configuration that you are proud to live with for the long haul.
At its heart, this whole discussion is about letting go of a comforting fantasy. Back to normal is easy to say and hard to challenge, especially when people are tired and anxious after an incident. But the world you operated in before the attack is gone the moment an attacker moves through your systems. Your data, your dependencies, and your people are all part of a new reality. You cannot rewind that tape. You can only decide what comes next. When you start to see recovery as the art of choosing and inhabiting new steady states, your conversations shift. You tolerate less magical thinking about rewinds. You ask for clearer articulation of what up really means for each service. You become more willing to leave certain paths closed if they no longer meet the bar. You find yourself pushing for named operating states, for planned degraded modes, and for a portfolio view of resilience instead of a single green checkmark that says done.
If you want a concrete next step, you do not have to rewrite every plan or rename every state overnight. Start with questions. Ask your teams which operating states they recognize today, even if nobody has named them yet. Ask who really has the authority to move the organization from one state to another. Ask where you are still promising a return to a normal that no longer exists. The answers will give you a roadmap for where to focus next.
Real-world recovery
is not about how quickly you can repaint the scenery. It is about whether you are willing to admit that the stage has changed and then design a way to perform safely on it. When you lead with that honesty, you give your organization a chance to build resilience that matches the complexity of the systems it depends on.
Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit baremetalcyber.com.